Well, this week we're working on something much more universal. Yes, we're still working on the bridge over the River Wye, but we're actually looking this week at weathering the rail and ballasting the track here at the north end of the railroad. So this would certainly apply to any garden railroad, but by extension, really any type of model railroad. So the track we are using on our model railroad here, our garden railroad, is Llagas Creek track. We picked Llagas Creek mostly because of the incredible good look and high performance of the ties. We're using their Code 250 rail. They offer it in both Code 250 and Code 225. The code of rail simply refers to how tall the rail is. In this case, 250 thousandths of an inch, in other words, a quarter of an inch. Llagas Creek does use a really high quality nickel silver for their rail, which is also important. But it's very important when picking garden railroad track to match the ties and the rail. They're not compatible with each other. If you were to go with, say, a micro engineering rail, it won't fit the Llagas Creek ties and vice versa. And since what I really fell in love with was the Llagas Creek ties, that and the fact that their rail is super high quality, decided to simply go exclusively with Llagas Creek. A lot of people use LGB track, which is also compatible with a lot of other types of track. It's really tall. It's code 325, I think, something like that. It's very big, and it uses a European-style tie. I just really prefer the look of the Llagas Creek. Now, the rail is delivered unweathered. It's just bare metal, and I found that I can't paint it first. When I'm laying this track indoors and hand laying it on wood ties, that's not a problem. I can go ahead and paint it first. But when I'm using their ties, I can't get their ties to slide down over the rail if the rail has already been painted. So it sort of requires putting the ties on first and then coming back and painting it after the fact. So I've gone ahead and put the ties and rail together. Actually, I generally let Mike over at Llagas Creek do that for me. It isn't that much more money to buy the track assembled and then get it laid and in place, and then I come back and mask the whole thing off and paint it in place. I'm using the wide blue painter's tape. It's about 2 inches, which means when you place it down through the middle between the rails, it's a little bit too wide, and then I just let it ride up the back side of the rail closest to me, because in this case I'm only going to be painting the visible side, the side facing me, and so it doesn't bother me that there's tape going up the back side of the front rail. In any place where it's somewhat difficult to get to the back rail, I go ahead and do the back rail first so that I'm not reaching over painted rail to work on the back part. I'll get the back all painted and finished and then move up to the closer rails so that I'm never reaching across anything that's already been painted and running the risk of getting paint all over my shirt. And then I simply spray paint the front edge of the rail. Again, since you can't see the back side of the track, I'm not worried about painting the back side. If this were a track that's in a place where you could see both sides of the rail, then I'd have to mask it 2 different ways and paint each side separately. Principally, the paint I like to use is this Rust-Oleum camouflage. They're dark brown camouflage paint. It comes in a lot of different colors, but I've also found that for whatever reason the dark brown is harder to find. And so I've also been using some other colors here. The Rust-Oleum dark brown satin is very similar. It's a little bit darker, and then it's a satin finish instead of a flat finish. I still prefer the camouflage paint, but I'll use them both in different places. And then there's these other colors which I'll put on just for a little bit of variety, because sometimes the rail isn't all that uniform. So I'll put these lighter colors and just sort of mist that on in places, just to make it feel like it's not completely uniform color. I try not to get the paint on the scenery and the benchwork, but since I'm doing the scenery after doing the painting of the rail, it doesn't matter that much. Also, when I come back and ballast the track, it covers up any of the paint that may have gotten here on the roofing material that I'm using to waterproof the benchwork. In areas where there are structures and so on, I want to make sure I don't get overspray onto those. So I'm just using a piece of foam board here to protect those. You can see here where I've added just a hint of the lighter colors, again, just so it's not so completely uniform. Rust and weathering, I don't feel like should be all that uniform. I try to be careful to avoid this here where it starts to get splattery. I don't feel like that's a good look at all. I try to get a nice uniform mist color on there, not speckles, if you will. Here you can see where I've applied a little bit of the lighter color over the top, and I just think that makes for a nice little bit of variety there, so it's not all just a uniform dark brown. Then once the paint is on the rails, before I strip off the masking tape, I'll come back with mineral spirits and clean off the top of the rail. That's all I ever clean my track with is mineral spirits. I found out the hard way that most products that you put on track will leave behind some sort of an insulating film that you don't want. Mineral spirits is just absolutely electrically transparent. It doesn't provide any kind of insulative layer on there at all, and it neatly cleans the top of the rail off so that your wheels will properly conduct. Because I am using power through the tracks, DCC power through the tracks directly. Here again you can see an area that's difficult to get to, and so I'm doing the back tracks first and working my way forward so that I'm never reaching over painted rail. Now, turnouts are a particular problem. It's impossible to mask these things off so that you can paint all of the rail at the same time. It is possible to paint more than one rail at a time, but in a lot of situations, that's all you can do is just paint one rail at a time. In this case, I was able to paint 3 rails, but it just sort of depends. Each situation is going to be different, and you're never going to be able to paint the entire turnout in one go. You have to mask an area off and then put down some paint and then let that dry and mask off again and paint more rail and so on. You want to make sure that you're painting the frog, the side of the frog, and the guardrails because those need to be weathered. And then I like to leave the top of the guardrail clear, not taking that off with my mineral spirits. It looks more like what you would naturally find on a railroad, is to have the top of the guardrail rusty as well. I think once you get the paint on here, it really brings out the beautiful quality of the Llagas Creek components, the Llagas Creek frog and the Llagas Creek guardrails and so on. Just really comes to life when you get the rusted rail on here. I try to be very careful to not get paint down inside the points. I'm not using the points to conduct electricity. They're wired separately, but I want to make sure that there's good contact there anyway and that there's no paint down in there. Wherever there's a rail joint, then there's a missing tie, and I save a lot of ties that haven't worked out, and I cut the spike heads off and just use those as separate ties, and I can slide them up under the rail later on to fill in the gaps. Now, once the rail is all weathered, I'm ready to move on to ballasting. One of the products I've been using for ballasting is natural clay kitty litter. And people have said, how can you possibly use kitty litter for ballast? The key here is to use just the unscented natural clay. Nothing fancy, the cheapest stuff. You can get it at Walmart, and it'll work out great as a ballast product. It absorbs moisture, it dries right back out, it doesn't clump, it doesn't turn weird. It's just it's actually a really good ballasting product. Just get a layer of that out onto the track and then smooth it all out with a brush this way. I'm just using one of these little shop brushes. And notice that it's not all uniform. It's crunched up parts and dusty parts, and that gives it a really natural look because it has a lot of variation in size. It produces a bit of loose dust which gets all over your track. Doesn't seem to interfere with the electrical conduction or anything like that, and I think it actually improves the look. I do take a soft cloth with mineral spirits and just wipe it down now and then, but generally speaking, I don't have a problem with it. I'm also using this as ore in the mine tipple. The mine tipple has the functional bin. I've got the roof off and the front off just so you can see what goes on here. But I fill up the hopper with that, and then I can open the little chute here on the hopper and dump that material out of the tipple and into my gondola car. And it's beautiful. Even the dust is just exactly what you would expect to see in a mine tipple this way. I think it's perfect. And then, of course, all around the tipple, I'm using the same material. I'm ballasting the track under the tipple, of course, because you'd have all kinds of spilled material down there. But I'm also putting a layer of this stuff all the way around the tipple. It really comes together. It looks really nice. Unlike working indoors, when you're working outdoors, it makes more sense to just have your ballast and scenery on the loose in here. No reason why not. If the wind blows it away, it just blows it away. It's not a big deal. But the advantage here is if you need to do any maintenance on the track, you can just pull this stuff up with a shop vac, and that will expose all of your track, and you can unscrew the track, move it around, do maintenance on it, whatever you need to do, and then just put the ballast back down when you're done. Just make sure you have a clean shop vac, don't have anything else in here, and then everything that ends up in here will just be your ballast, and then you can take the ballast and dump it back into the bag from whence it came, and when you're ready you can put it back down on the track. I also do the same thing with a lot of loose scenery material. Looks good just being at the bottom of the cliff loose like this. And then when I need to, I can just vacuum that all up, keep it separate from my ballast, and then do whatever work I need to do and put it right back where it came from. Here again, just empty out the shop vac and make sure you keep everything in separate bins so it doesn't all cross-contaminate with your other products. Now, another product I've been using for ballast is poultry grit. It comes in different sizes and so on, and it's crushed granite, so it's much closer to what a railroad would actually use as ballast. Has a rather different look to it because it's all more uniform. But I'm using this in some places, and I've even tried mixing the crushed granite with the kitty litter, and that works out rather well too. But it works just fine, just like the kitty litter does. And I'm just using each product in different places to get sort of a sense of how they look and how they work. For what it's worth, poultry grit is used on farms, and it's put down on the ground for chickens and turkeys and so on to peck at and eat because they have to have a certain amount of stone in their diet for their digestive system to work correctly. It's just a bird thing. Now, one of the things that's important to have with a ballast is just like on a real railroad, it has to provide drainage I don't want standing water up on top of the railroad. I want it to drain off, and there are drains in the benchwork to provide for that. And so I need to make sure that the water drains away from the ballast. The poultry grit drains nicely because it doesn't absorb moisture. You would think that the kitty litter would be the other way and hold the moisture in place. But surprisingly, I think it works even better because it absorbs the moisture and holds it in the ballast, and then the sun dries that out, so it isn't standing there. It doesn't pool underneath your ballast, whereas with the poultry grit, it will tend to pool under the ballast. Come winter, both of these products freeze solid, and actually that's a good thing because then you can come back with the shop brush and sweep the snow away, and your ballast is just frozen down there, and it doesn't come up with the snow, and it doesn't move around, and it doesn't seem to hurt the benchwork or the track or anything, so it works out just fine. When you're ballasting around your turnouts, you need to be careful not to get any material in the points or in the flangeways between the guardrails and the running rails, but that's just a matter of being careful to not let it get down in there, which isn't tough to do at all. Well, there you have it. I think the whole thing's looking really good, and all it remains to do now is touch up the area under the bridge and make the pond under there so it actually holds water, and touch up the scenery in a few places, and this entire area is done. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please consider subscribing. And the easy way to subscribe is by clicking on the upcoming blue button. Boink, right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and Karen and I will see you here on Sunday. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.